Welcome everyone to this latest Grassy talk. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Adrian Marshall. I'm the facilitator of the Grassy Plains Network, and we are, as of last year, part of the Victorian National Parks Association. I'd like to, before we introduce Cath, I would like to acknowledge the lands of the Wurundjeri that I'm on and pay my respects to elders past and present, but also extend that really to all the Indigenous peoples of Victoria, and we have people from the Snowy River region and Monero. So just more broadly, like to say I suppose profound thanks to all those people who do so much to look after our country. And just briefly to say that I went on a walk to some grasslands with members of the Bunyurong the other week, and well, my eyes were open to the way that they viewed the landscape through a totally different lens to the way I did, just seeing things that I had no perception of. And I think that's just something to bear in mind too, that profound understanding of many aspects of the landscape that pass by well, me, and I'm sure many of us here tonight. Anyway, enough of my rambling. I would like to introduce Cath Olive. Cath is the engagement director. Now, you can correct me at great length in due course, but the engagement director at the Euroa Arboretum. Cath is educator and a driving force for Indigenous plant matters across her region, and it's fantastic. She has years of experience in the seed collecting territory. We can have questions at the end. I'm sure you can welcome to just butt in during the talk as well, but put questions in the chat or just shout them out at me when we wind up. Cath will speak for 45 minutes or 50 minutes or however long it is. And when we get to it, we'll just keep going with some questions. And I think that's, oh no, it's not enough from me. I also have to say we do have Grassy Plains Network meeting immediately after this. Well, we'll have a 10-minute break and then we'll have our meeting, and we'll be discussing all sorts of matters to which you are all more than welcome to come along and join in on. It's always great having new people with us. So we'll be talking, we'll be talking in particular a lot about the roadside clearing that has been happening in just the last couple of weeks that has sort of hit our news anyway. But there we'll be talking about much more than that as well. Anyway, without further ado, Cath, if you'd like to share your screen and introduce yourself, that would be wonderful. Not necessarily in that order.
Sure. Thanks, Adrian. And welcome, everybody. I would like to also acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Tanarong country, and I pay my enormous respect to elders past, to elders present, particularly for their resilience and their capacity to share knowledge and continue to keep learning despite so many challenges, and for the young upcoming leaders as well, who are doing such amazing work at learning culture and sharing culture across their country. And that will become evident as we talk about how significant it is, our relationship with our traditional owners from within the seed bank, but also within the Arboretum as well. So just a little short update. Euroa Arboretum is not really an arboretum. It's more of a grassy woodland site. We've got 28 hectares of grassy woodland that we've restored, working alongside of Tanarong as well, particularly. We have a seed bank, the Golden Broken Indigenous Seed Bank. We have a plant nursery, we have bush crew, we have education programs. But tonight, Adrian's asked me to talk specifically about the seed bank. And it's not necessarily a subject specifically about grasslands, but grasslands are definitely part of that story. So without further ado, I'll share my screen and we'll get into the seed bank chat. Adrian, is that working for you? Great. And Adrian did mention asking questions throughout. It's always uncomfortable talking into the void. So I really would welcome if you've got questions or comments coming throughout. It's quite nice to hear that I'm not talking to myself. So a little question. The Goulburn Indigenous Seed Bank covers the Goulburn catchment. It pretty much is from the Murray and goes down to about King Lake and goes from around about Broadford and up to Benalla. So it's a relatively wide area. We're covering Yorta and Tanorong country, but not their entire areas. So just a few questions to ask you before we start and to have you think about as we're going through this talk. Where does your seed come from? If you are purchasing plants from a local nursery, do you know where your nursery is collecting their seed from? Are they purchasing their seed from a particular seed bank? There aren't many seed banks in Victoria, so there's probably quite a good chance it might be coming from Goulburn. If you're in Melbourne, if you're looking to actually be harvesting seed, where's your remnant vegetation that you're actually collecting your seed from? How big are those populations? How healthy are those populations? Are they quite small? Are they inbred? Where are they actually being able to cross-pollinate from? They're all really good questions to think about if you're harvesting seed. We're really seeing demand for seed increasing, and how do we meet that demand? How do we supply diversity? How do we restore grasslands? How do we restore landscapes? These are all sort of questions that we'll grill into as we're going. And touching a little bit on the finances of seed banks and why there are so few seed banks in Victoria. Because 10 years ago there were about 10 seed banks, and now I think we're sitting at about 4. So they've really diminished. And how do we support our traditional owners in their aspirations in seed delivery services as well? So we'll talk a little bit, not generally, but more specifically about what we're doing working alongside a mob. So what does wild seed harvest look like? And here's Carolina just about breaking her back trying to nip off some seed from a eucalypt, maybe a grey box, could be red gum. So this is actually something that's that we do quite a bit of wild harvest, but we're really looking at perhaps diminishing that. But there's some real challenges with going out harvesting seed. So for starters, all our seed collectors are governed by a seed collecting permit, which does not cover national parks or state parks. We have quite strict restrictions on where we can harvest our seed from. And we have a target of, or have a limit of only harvesting 10% of the seed from the plant. So that's quite strict, and we stick to that really strictly. Most of our shrub species, wattles, peas, ground covers, daisies, they literally all time themselves for about December. We start harvesting our seed, some of our little light fluffy daisies, in about late October. We hit absolute peak season in that first week of December normally. And then always Christmas. We've got so much to harvest between Christmas and New Year. And then it starts to tail off by about the second week of January. Last year, we had a hell of a season. It was dreadful. we literally condensed our entire seed collecting season into about 3 weeks. It was madness. We pretty much wound up by Christmas. It was the most dreadful season I've seen in 25 years. Those extreme heat days, so your 40-degree days, means that seed is ripening almost instantly, and it's ripening across a really wide area. So we would be generally up at 6 a.m. out the door and harvesting as hard as we can on those days where it's absolutely stinking hot. So it's not for the faint-hearted, and it's quite often we have people who ask to come along and join us on our seed collecting days until they realise when we're actually what that means, and that they're in for about a 12-hour day and it's not going to be pretty. So yeah, it's a real challenging time to be harvesting, and to be harvesting the quantity that we're really being demanded of. We're really looking as well at those wild populations, and really seeing that a lot of our wild populations, particularly for our more rare and threatened plants, they're really fragmented, they're really small. We're really noticing the impact of deer and wallabies, dry conditions, climate fluctuations. We're quite regularly seeing that some of our populations that we would have been harvesting pretty regularly about 15, 20 years ago, they're almost non-existent anymore. They've been chewed down to stubs, and if they're in existence, they're just not producing seed. We're noticing quite often that the seed that we're harvesting is genetically depauperate, and we have had that tested, a couple of species tested with CSIRO. That's what they're telling us with their genetics, but we're also seeing that in the nursery play out. So quite often what we were looking at in the nursery is quite fickle responses from different species, and we thought that it was how we were growing. But the more we look into it, the more we realise that actually it's probably based on genetics. When we go back into our records and we look at specific records of where that seed's come from, consistently those plants that are looking yellow, not thriving, not really doing very much in the nursery, have come from really small populations and isolated populations. So that's making a really big impact and difference in our wild harvest. So wild collection and species suited for wild collection. As I mentioned, we're really looking at how do we actually progress beyond wild collection? How do we take the pressure off wild places, and particularly just leaving enough seed, or enough, in a year like this, enough seed out there for wildlife. But there are some species that we know we really haven't got a solution at this point going forward that we're actually going to be able to take the pressure off. And the eucalypts, your tree species, because they're so slow to actually develop seed, and they take such a lot of space, we really don't have places that are secure enough for a long period of time, other than, say, perhaps a bush heritage property, that we can actually be having big enough populations that we can be collecting from. So we're sort of stuck with collecting on roadside. The one benefit with our tree species is they, bless their hearts, they don't actually ripen at that critical time for most of them. They're not actually ripening smack on December. We're picking at the moment. And as you can see from MIM, we work as hard as we can to follow contractors around or make the most of windfall. We keep our ear to the ground. And, if we've got the opportunity for a collection that we don't have to muck about and break our backs trying to hook it down with the pole, then that's a real bonus for us too. Our rare species and diverse collection, we can't put everything into seed orchard. Not at this point. We haven't got enough investment in seed orchard. So for really small quantities of plants, or really quite specific plants, we are very much still dependent on those wild harvests. But that's becoming much harder to actually, much harder to do. We've got less and less people with skill that can go out and do that. And it's not just that plant ID skill. It really is knowing country. It's knowing country really intimately. It's knowing where all those plant populations are. It's knowing when they seed. It's being able to keep an eye on those plant populations. So you're looking at, we have 252 species that we've got in the seed bank. We're looking at a really wide selection of plant species from the Murray to King Lake and across the catchment that we're needing to be harvesting. So that's a huge job and a huge skill base. And there are probably 2 or 3 people in the catchment at this point that have that background and that skill base. It's about 30 years worth of gathering that information. So as you can imagine, it's not something that is easily trainable. So that's something that we really need to recognise and come up with some solutions about how we train people and build that skill base. And then this is the other concern with wild harvest, is if you've travelled 100K to find a species, and we do, there are a few species that we're really targeting, and not just for nursery or for whatever. Often it's to be putting it into our seed orchard. If you find that plant and there's only a handful of seeds on it, you're going to collect 10%. And that's a real challenge to actually, to your ethics as well. And it's something that with this drive of more demand, it's really putting pressure. We're really specific with who we have as our seed collectors. We're really tight on who goes out seed collecting for us. We know exactly where they're going in terms of the wild collection. We keep a really tight handle on it. And it's an absolute nightmare to be managing that, but we're really passionate about making sure that we're not over harvesting areas. So that's something that we do specifically, but all seed banks are different. They all have different ways of operating. So it's, there's not one size fits all, but that's something that we really pride ourselves on, that we have a small number of collectors that are going out and know their stuff and are going to stick to the code. So this is our seed harvest of 24-25, which, as I said, was a crap year. It really was terrible. It's just giving you an indication of where we've done our collection and how much collection we've taken. And then the demand as well. So yellow is showing how much we've sold and green is showing how much we've collected. You'll notice, and this is changing over time, and some of our slides as we keep going will indicate this. The grass collection, we literally didn't harvest grass this year. We've got native seeds not far from us in Myrtleford. They're doing a cracking job. They have really clean seed. They have great prices. They do so well with their grass. We think, well, there's no point competing. We're not able to provide seed for the same quality or the same price. So we've chosen to step back from seed. And it's also a point in time when everything else is going. So we thought, rather than kill ourselves, let's focus on our acacias, let's focus on our ground cover species, let's forget about the grasses. So we're pretty happy with that position. This is a bit of an old table. I did this collation in 22, but it's sort of pretty close. What it's indicating is how much seed for each of these different seed banks is physically in storage, and how much is the capacity that we're pretty much we can harvest each year. Now, probably seeing Victoria's increased their capacity, we've increased our capacity. I'm not so sure about South Gippsland. And we also have Miller and Mallee that have come on in the meantime as well, and they've been able to do some quite solid harvesting. But what you will see down that bottom point is that the total for Victoria in storage at this point is about 2.5 tonnes. And on average, we're collecting across all of the seed banks 400 kilos most years. And that's a bit of give and take. We're probably increasing it a bit, but not significantly. So keep that figure in your head, because that'll come back to haunt us in a little bit. So this is the other side of the coin. This is what we're really working towards at the Arboretum. And we've been extraordinarily lucky that we've had investment in seed orchards since 2012. So Golden Broken Catchment Management Authority secured some really good funding back in 2012 and invested in quite a number of different seed orchards around the catchment. They're just at a point now where they're all starting to fall over. They're just at that age where they're losing their viability. We need to start replacing and replenishing them, and we really need more reinvestment back in seed orchards. And we've learnt quite a lot of things along the way. These are just 3 designs of different seed orchards, and I'll just show you a little bit more about what we're working on at the Arb in a minute. So, but this is the conundrum between seed orchards and local provenance, and I'm assuming that if you're into grasslands, you're into that detail, that you'll be really into your local provenance too, because you've got such amazing species that can be quite different in local areas. They can really show local variability. Whereas a seed orchard really is a collection of the same species, but from quite a wide area. We're really looking at making sure we're collecting from bigger genetic populations. We're really careful as well to be trying to get some of those populations that are more to the north of their range, so that we're picking up those hotter, drier, climate-adapted plants. But we're also really aware of our local provenances and how variable some of them can be. And we have great long discussions and debates about different types of plants. Got one in particular that keeps going round and round is Acacia venusiflua. As grassland people, it's a medium-sized shrub. It is crazily variable in our catchment. And so we're always debating which variant goes into our seed orchard, and that we should keep the same variant in that orchard, and we shouldn't be mixing up the different variants, and they should be represented in different areas. Another one's Grevillea alpina, although we really don't harvest that for seed, but that has got every colour under the sun across the catchment in every form, from almost tree form to below our knee form. So, some of these plant species, they're so unique that we really need to be making sure that we still harvest and keep that local provenance. But what we really are wanting to work towards for more for that volume of being able to harvest is seed orchards. So this is a bit of a diagram as to how we're collecting from seed orchards. The little circles with the trees at the top are indicating each of the different populations that we might be collecting from, harvesting that seed, pulling it together into a nursery situation, and then being able to grow out those plants, which is giving us genetically diverse seed. And ideally, if we're looking at harvesting, if this is, say, I think this might have been originally a picture of Pittosporum angustifolium and different populations across the Murray. And so you've got some populations that are only representing 5 plants, some that have got really good sized populations of up to 150. We're really collecting from those small populations, just small percentages of plants, and where you've got the bigger populations, much bigger collections of plants. So overall, as we're pulling all that together, we've actually got a seed area of about 500 plants. So that's the sort of plan that we're working towards, to make sure we've got a good genetic mix and we're collecting from those hotter, drier climates as well. And then this is some of the different types of orchards that we've got going at the Arb and around. So this is our daisy boxes. The daisy boxes are glorious, actually. They really are quite beautiful. And as grassland people, you'll get that for sure. They're at a really nice height. So they're at a point where we literally just go along with our dust buster and suck up seed. And there are some species that you can do that to. Vitidinia is such a cracker. We can literally dust bust it 3 times a day when it's really going well, and almost get a sack full every time. That's a really rewarding plant. But something like the Wallenbergia stricta has seed as fine as dust, pretty much. It's such a pain in the neck to be collecting, but when you're looking at it flowering like that, and they literally all go to seed at the same time, we just take scissors and snip them off, pop them in a bag, and let them drop. So you really can be harvesting, even though they're quite small areas. They're not huge populations of those daisies. We are actually able to harvest quite a reasonable amount. The one deal with it is, though, because we don't have, I don't think, enough genetics in those boxes to really be ideal long term, we try and have turnover in the boxes. So about every 2 or 3 years, all the boxes get completely cleaned out and they get a whole new batch of species put in, or whole new populations of those plants. So it's that constant refreshing, it's constant work trying to keep those daisy boxes at their peak and really productive. We're actually in the process of just rebuilding these intensive seed orchards. These are more for our pea species. So you can see that we've got them mounded. They've got a little valley between them with a riser. And so our pea species have that knack of popping and just blowing seed all over the place. So on our left, we've got Devesia latifolia. The Devesias are an absolute stinker to collect. They almost across the catchment, they pop on the same day. You cannot get them. You can catch them a little bit green, but not really green. You can watch and watch and watch them for 2 weeks coming up, and literally all on one day, at one time, they're just about popping in your face. So they're ideal for putting into our seed orchard, where on that day that they do pop, they're actually dropping down into that valley, and we're able to vacuum or sweep them up the next day. It doesn't matter if we're not there exactly on the day. Although ironically, this year, the day that they did pop, it happened to be a storm, and that one day actually we did lose a stack of seed because the storm blew them all off the plastic even, but that's just bad luck. A lot of our Pultoneas are held in those days in the seed, in these intensive seed orchards. Canedia had really good success with the Dilwinias. Canedia is not a huge fan of the black plastic, as much as we've been able to collect up to 5 kilos of that plant. Just that the heat from the black plastic can really cook it. We've tried white plastic, that's been a disaster. That's actually really hard to work on, much harder than we thought. But we just keep tweaking this process. We're on about our 3rd cycle. The plastic lasts about 8 years. So we're on about our 3rd cycle of using this process. And it works a treat. We've been able to harvest plants that we would never be able to harvest in bulk in the wild. And then this is our really bulk collection. This is for our wattles. This is based at a property Kilter Rural Own, and we literally can drive up the middle with a trailer and shake the seed into a trailer. So it's really effective. This last year, we'll have a look at figures of what we've collected, but this last year we collected 30 kilos in a day. So that's vast in comparison to what we can collect in the wild. This is what we're working on a lot more. So we have a lovely relationship with Goulburn Valley Water. They've offered us their property at Avenel. It's about 40 hectares. And we're putting about 10 hectares into seed orchard this year with more of our wattle species and a bit of Dodnea as well. So we're really pleased to be able to put in bulk amounts, 2,000 plants at a time, to really be able to harvest a good amount. And it also means you can put a crew in and they can pretty much just work away for a day without having to have all of the mucking about of up and shifting in different wild populations or necessarily knowing the plant species. And then this is the other opportunity. And John Del Pratt and Catherine, I did see that you were here as well in the talk. And this is we have a little gathering quite often in December where John and Cath come and help harvest as well at the Arb. We've done so much grassland work that we've now got a great little supply of our own daisies that we can be harvesting within the grounds. And so with our little backpack vacuum, out we go and we can harvest really happily, and our volunteers can go out and harvest nicely as well. So yeah, it's great to actually have an area within our own grounds. We know our diversity of genetics that we've put into that site, so we can really confidently harvest pretty much everything that's in the grounds. So this is a little bit of an indication of how much seed we've been able to harvest in the last 2 years, both from seed production areas, wild harvest and arboretum. 2023-24 was an awesome year. It was one of the best seed collection seasons I've seen in 25 years. It was really good. And you can see that reflected in the figures. You know, we've collected, actually, I've just got to shift that screen. We've collected 200 kilos, 210 kilos in 2023-24, as opposed to this year where we've collected only 85. So it's been a really big shift of how much seed we've collected, but you can also see where that seed's coming from as well. So you can see that seed orchards are already, even though we haven't completed the work yet, we're still only really just starting in replacing all of our seed orchards again. They're still producing a vast amount of seed for us. They're already producing, even in a good year, almost half. And last year they held their own. They're amazing how much seed we're able to harvest from our seed orchards. And the Arb grounds itself, as much as that looks like a really small figure, that's some really good diversity in that collection. So that's a lot of our daisy and fiddly plants that we've been able to collect just being based at the Arboretum. So at the moment, we've got 252 species in the bank, and we've got 672 kilos in storage. So this graph gives you an indication of how much seed we've collected each year. But it's not necessarily an accurate picture necessarily. So if you can just take a moment to look at the multicolored candies on this, on the second graph, that actually probably tells a better picture. We took over the seed bank in 2019-20. We took it over, I think, in December, so we really didn't get ourselves together to do much for harvest that year. 2021, we were just starting to get our head around it. By 21-22, we had a Working for Victoria team. That made a huge difference, having a team that we didn't have to pay for. That was amazing. 22-23, if you recall, we had some serious floods that year. And with that higher rainfall, it meant that we actually had really poor pollination. We had really poor flowering. We had really poor pollination. We had really poor seed set. And yet that graph is showing that we did pretty well, but that was largely because we made up for it in grass. We went out with our bandicoot harvester and were able to harvest a lot of grass. But as I mentioned earlier, with native seeds doing such a great job, and also it's really quite hard to store bulk amounts of seed, we have chosen to really back off that grass collection. Last year, which was an amazing year, we've done brilliantly well. We've collected all of the different diversity. Haven't really focused on the grasses, but really pleased with ourselves with how much we've collected. This year we've done okay, but it was a really hard year and it's reflected in the numbers. So this is what is also driving a lot of the seed demand at the moment. In fact, it's really driving, the bulk of the seed demand. Is the biodiversity, the state government's biodiversity plan for 2037. So I'll just give you that little recap that there are some few key statements what the state government are wanting to achieve with that biodiversity plan. Engaging all Australians in Indigenous biodiversity conservation, building ecosystem resilience in a changing climate using suitable Indigenous plants. And here are some really impressive figures. Attaining measurable results over the next 15 years, revegetation goals for Victoria are 200,000 hectares of revegetation, 200,000 hectares of permanently protected, sorry, I think that actually should read 20,000 hectares of new permanently protected areas on private land. So how much seed will we need to actually do that? What we tend to do in the Golden Broken is direct seeding as our main vehicle for any large-scale revegetation work. So we'll often sow a direct seeding or our shrubs, easily collected species, as a general rule in some of our larger revegetation sites, and then we'll hand plant our trees. Grasslands are a different story, and they do require a whole different process, and we're really working at how do we actually build more diversity back into our native grass sites that perhaps are lacking diversity. So that's something that we're working on specifically at the Arb. But that biodiversity plan, if we look at that 200,000 hectares, and if we're looking at direct seeding as being the main vehicle to achieve that, we're looking at 100,000 kilos of seed at this current point. To have a think back to that original graph where we had 2.5 tonnes of seed in storage, we've got 2.5% in storage currently, with the capacity at this current point of producing about 400 to 600 kilos per year. We're such a massive shortfall, it's not funny. So Cassinia Environmental, they've been given the funding from the state government to be producing the private land revegetation. So their goal is 20,000 hectares, and they estimate that they will need 15 tonnes of native seed to be able to actually achieve their revegetation target of 20,000 hectares. I think this might be their third year. I think it's their third year in the process of a seven-year funding, and they're already saying that seed source will be their limiting factor in whether they can actually achieve their goal. So at the Arb, or the Golden Broken Indigenous Seed Bank, Kim Wilson and I set ourselves a target that we really wanted to actually achieve, or we wanted to support that goal, that we wanted to at least be able to produce 10% of that seed requirement, which would sort of be our component for our catchment as an overall whole across the state. So we had a plan that we wanted to have about 30 widely used species that we wanted to have in bulk supply. So that's what we're working on with the Golden Valley order. We really also wanted to focus on these, what we're calling our ARC species, or our conservation species, that they're not yet listed, but they are heading in that direction. We really want to make sure that we protect those small, fragmented, isolated populations. We want to see them in seed orchards, so that we can actually be putting them back into the landscape, that we can protect them as well in at least where they're growing for seed harvesting from deer and wallaby predation. So we had about 100 hectare goal. We had 75 plants that we targeted, and we wanted to have a target of about 1,000 kilos that we wanted to start producing off those seed orchards each year. And we felt that would pretty much be our contribution to that biodiversity target. So we've got Golden Valley Water, who have been fantastic at supporting us. We've got great partnership with Tanorong Land of Waters, and they've given us some great support funding-wise. And we've also got Natural Resources and Conservation Trust, who have been able to support us kicking off with that goal. So here are some more of these challenges that we face within this process as well. There's this whole issue about how much we're harvesting. So we've got this massive shortfall of what we're harvesting, what we need to harvest, and the diversity of what we need to harvest. And then we've got sales and this really fluctuating, widely challenging income that we've got as well. And probably the two most challenging years have been 23, 24 and 24, 25. So 23, 24, we knew we were going to have a great season. Everything was lining up that it was going to be fantastic. We threw everything we had at it with our staff to be out collecting. And we did. We collected really well. We pulled in that 210 kilos and we were really thrilled with ourselves. But our financial manager was less impressed with what we did because we just about broke the Arboretum in doing it, because we really didn't make the sales. You know, we've had all this prediction that we're going to be selling good seed quantities, and it didn't happen last year. And you can see that total, we made 77,000, and yet we'd spent significantly more in wages, significantly more. 24, 25, we're sitting a whole lot better, and we look like we're almost evened ourselves out, and it's actually okay. We haven't made the harvest, and it's been so much harder to pull in the seed. It's certainly taken significantly more hours to pull in that 85 kilos worth of seed than it did in the previous year. But we've made great sales, so that's balanced it out. And in fact, yeah, I need to talk to our finance manager because he's recently retired. I need to show him actually that maybe the seed bank isn't going to break the arb after all. What we did as well is we've tried to actually break this down. This is going to sort of make your eyes go a bit square, but we've broken down how we sell our seed into categories. So starting at 1 is our easiest seed to harvest. It's our golden bottle. It's just in bulk. You can collect it absolutely by the bucketful, and it's pretty easy to clean. Going right down to our threatened species at number 5, which are absolute little stinkers. You only collect tiny amounts. They're a stinker to harvest. They're a stinker to clean. They're absolutely worth gold. So we've got this pricing structure across that whole spectrum, from the easy to the hard. And you can see then as well where those sales are actually coming in as well. So if hopefully it's reflecting the effort that goes into that harvest. It changes dramatically each year. So a lot of our nursery sales are going to be focusing from that 2B to 5 category, whereas our direct seeding sales are going from 1A to 2A sort of category. That's the quantity. And the direct seeding is really driven by government funding. So this is where Cassinia are sort of kicking in this last year. They're actually purchasing larger quantities, and Breeding Australia are purchasing larger quantities. But it really fluctuates. It's all over the shop every year because it's so driven by government funding. And then we're looking at, once again, that variation between seed collected and seed sold. This huge constant oscillation. And we're very much aware that at this point in time that seed sales are outstripping what we can collect. And I think in the future will definitely be outstripping what we can collect. So that takes us to different models. You know, there's different, so after I've boggled all your brains with the finances and how much it's costing, there are different models for different seed banks. Deniliquin, I think, have probably the clincher of the seed bank models. They've got government funding and support. They have one position that's fully funded all the time, so they have stability, which is great. And they're then able to put on casual staff to be out harvesting when they need to be harvesting. So if we go back to that original graph, Deniliquin have the capacity to be increasing their seed harvest very quickly and really responding to conditions. Then we've got other models where it's very much based on volunteers collecting or being paid, not necessarily how much time people have been putting into their travel and their harvest. Seed prices are cheaper, and seed is paid often on consignment, or for particular species it can be paid up front. That's a different model. Often it means that seed prices are less, but you're also it's very hard to upscale that other than just upscaling volunteers. It's much harder to actually be driving that model to actually be growing it to a bigger scale that's with the scale of demand that we've got. We work very much on paid staffing. We do have volunteers. We love our volunteers to bits, but we're really determined that we want to make sure that we sustain our industry. We want to provide a pathway for young people to be employed. We want to be building that skill base of people with their plant identification skills. And we want to be able to grow as well. So with this demand, we want to actually be able to upscale as the demand comes. And I think unless you're paying people, it's harder to do that. We don't tend to purchase seed on consignment unless it's from really trusted collectors. But actually, we don't tend to do consignment. We tend to just go out. We give them a target and we say, can you please go and collect these particular species and this amount of seed? So, and then we have this whole challenge of, well, how do we actually cost our seed? You know, you saw that scaling from 1 to 5. That's how we've chosen to scale it. But that's actually based on a good year. And what do we do in a bad year? What do we do with this climate fluctuation? Because we're seeing, I've been watching seed change dramatically in a decade from, over 25 years of collecting. It's changing really quickly. And it's very hard to make that adjustment. And to price that into our seed orchards, into our seed collecting as well. And then we have our TOs, who I love working with. I love working with the traditional owners, and they're really wanting to have a part in seed, and I actually really strongly support them to be owning seed and driving the seed industry. I think it's a really powerful place for them to actually be governing that process. And it's certainly that they're wanting to head. So at this stage, there's been 3 Right Plant, Right Way conferences over about the last 3 or 4 years. And I came back from the last conference and was absolutely ready to hand over the seed bank to our traditional owners. Challenge is which one? Do we hand it over to Euroa? Do we hand it over to Tanarong? Do we work through that process of where it goes? And I approached Tanarong, who I work with more closely, and they said to me, Cath, we're not ready yet. We haven't got the capacity at this stage. We're not quite ready to be handing this over. They said, at this stage, you're the custodian. So that was a really interesting shift for me to think, okay, actually that's I've been getting more and more grumpy. I've been a really cranky old woman. The whole frustration of running a seed bank at almost at a loss for 5 years. I've been really frustrated with the lack of buy-in from state government, from what we're actually wanting to do, considering that we're actually supporting their goals. I've been really frustrated with the lack of support for seed orcharding. So that was actually a real shift for me from being a really grumpy old woman and bemoaning finances to thinking, okay, actually, if I'm a custodian, then that means I've got obligations and I've got some real responsibility for this seed, and this seed is precious. So it's changed me from being a really cranky old thing and thinking, okay, if we're going to be custodians, let's do it properly. Let's actually really think about what we need to do. So this was our next step. We really thought about this statement. We've run it past Tanarong, we've run it past our committee, and they're happy with what we've actually come up with. So let me just read it out to you. As a seed bank, we don't just supply seed. We consider native seed as a precious resource. Native seed is critical to support natural food chains, ecosystem function, and is laboriously collected whilst ensuring sustainable harvest. We are invested in the future of our seed and request it is used thoughtfully to give the best possible benefit to restoring the health of our country. So it sounds like it could be lip service, but this is also what it means as well. So this sits underneath it. So that we prioritise seed to be distributed within the Golden Broken catchment. We're working towards referencing the traditional owner lands where it's taken from, so whether it's coming from Euroa or Tamarong. We'll supply seed for the bush feed industry only if it benefits traditional owners. This is something they're really passionate about. They really are not happy about bush foods not having some connection back to traditional owners or some way of benefiting them. We'll adhere strictly to the Flora Bank guidelines, that's that 10% collection. Projects promoting biodiverse plantings that reflect appropriate country type will be prioritised. Now that's a pretty interesting one. We're getting a lot of pressure from carbon offsetting, and that doesn't necessarily fit country type. So there's been a whole lot of requests for seed recently that have been for plantings that will be 100% too dense for different sites. We're looking at 1,000 stems per hectare of trees or large shrubs, when probably the EBC benchmark would indicate 100. So we're saying, actually, we're really not happy about selling you that seed. And we're starting to really negotiate with who we're selling it to. We'll continue to develop our seed orchards to take pressure off our wild harvest. We're 100% committed to our seed orchards. And where seed of species is low in stock or where supply is challenging, we might ask people to actually purchase plants as tube stock rather than ordering seed, because we can really reduce down our seed. So if you have come to us and asked for seed, and we've given you a grilling on where is your seed going and your site preparation and the site that it's going to and your species collection, this is why. This is the background. This is our theory behind it. We want to make sure that our seed is 100% going into the right location for the right purposes, and that we're honouring our traditional owners in that process. So here we go. Adrian, I haven't even looked at the time. Thankfully, it looks like I actually have managed to keep it on time.
Just perfect. Don't worry.
Good. Well, this is my last slide. So, we really have struggled with, well, what can we actually ask people to do? But I think given the audience that we've got tonight is one, spread the word. Like, we're really frustrated that we're not getting any traction at all with state government. You wouldn't believe the number of discussions I've had with them, and there's still nothing. I think really Quizziat nurseries, where's this seed coming from? Like, really understand that process. And I've talked a little bit about this. We don't just have seed shortages, we've got shortages of skilled staff. So, the more that we can work at supporting each other to build that skill base would be amazing. Your traditional owners, they really want to be part of this industry and they really want support. So at the moment, I'm actually working with Tamarong one day a week where we're actually building their nursery. And I'm really keen to support Yorta. They're thinking along the same lines. How do we actually build that skill base to be working in this industry? And at least confidently, I know that I'm not actually sending them up the garden path. I still think we haven't got this seed industry sorted with our finances and with how we actually build capacity in this area. So I would feel really uncomfortable selling seed as a great option for them at this point, but I still think that's where they should be working in that area. Build supply. If you are interested in seed orchards, we're really happy to chat to you. But if you are thinking about seed orchards, it's a major investment. You're looking at a turnover probably about every 8 to 10 years, really, with the plants and how much they produce. target your species that you want to have, that you want to be working on, and just work on small quantities that you can actually be putting in. And I would really ask you to consider as well that it's not necessarily about reducing cost. I do think that if we don't cost our seed adequately, we're not going to actually be using it as carefully as we could. And I really think we need to be working at how do we drive seed going further? How do we make sure that we can't coat seed or, you know, just work at different methods that we can guarantee that success more effectively? That's me.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Cathy. That was gripping, I'd have to say. It was just like a story very well told and very, very considered, and so much food for thought there. We have a mountain of questions in the chat. I might start off with Catherine Horsfall's one, which is, where do we invest? Have you considered crowdfunding to augment your budget and to achieve admirable seed production goals? Like, where is the people in all of this?
Look, we do actually have a donation page. We have given that consideration. We're not necessarily crowdfunding, but there is a donation page on the ARB, and you can specifically select seed orchards. So yes, there is that opportunity.
Yeah, great. I might comment too that, like, we've had a lot to do with the Melbourne Strategic Assessment and the Western Grassland Reserve, which is 15,000 hectares of grassland to be restored, and we've been asking them for years and years and years just to have a seed component that slowly increases over the years to drive this industry. And it just falls on deaf ears. It is remarkable, and the lack of government engagement in this is really surprising. What is there a reason, do you think, for that lack of, like why aren't they investing more in places like yourself?
Look, I'm still at a bit of a loss. I think it's twofold. I do think that the traditional owners have definitely said, yes, we want to be part of this. We want to drive this. And I think they're definitely, there's a little bit of waiting for the TOs to be in that space. Personally, I think it's really unfair of our traditional owners that they would almost be expected to take on this absolute mess and shortfall. I think it's, and in all honesty, I don't think the traditional owners are that fussed about the biodiversity strategy and the quantity that they're after. There are some definitely that are working towards, you know, producing bigger volumes, but not all of them are reflecting that. So that's sort of interesting in itself, that you know, that's not necessarily the direction for the traditional owners. But I think the other side of it too, and I've heard this a couple of times, is that the state government is saying, well, the industry will sort this out, that the industry will drive this process. However, the only seed bank that I can see that has a model that is actually really working well, and they would still say that there's a shortfall, and they would still talk about all the frustrations that we do, but the Deniliquin model, which is coming from Murray LLS and has New South Wales support, is a really different model. They have potential to scale. And that model, I think, has some real potential if we were to look at that.
Indeed. People can put up their hands. Julia Fu, you are not Julia Fu, but you have that name anyway. Do tell us your question. You're on mute. You're on mute. While Julia Fu is working out the technology there, perhaps I'll ask Jerry Ho asks about difficult species like Pimelia and so on. Do you have a focus on trying to crack how to produce those in your seed production areas?
Not so much the really challenging ones. Look, we still certainly have quite a range of different threatened species. We would be looking, rather than as seed, we'd probably be looking at them from a plant perspective within the nursery. So the primelias we generally do from cuttings rather than seed, which is unfortunate because then we don't keep the genetics. But that great genetic diversity. But there are a whole range of species that we don't use, and in fact, as I mentioned, that skill shortage or that requirement for some really significant skill to actually know how to harvest will probably actually be reducing our diversity over time. Rather than, we've already burnt out one of our seed director, so we don't want to keep doing that. We really have to be working at how do we actually sustain our team without doing too much diversity in there, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
Okay, hard decision to make. I don't envy you that sort of decision. Julia Fu.
Yes, I'm now back on deck. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Loud and clear.
Good. It's Michael Murray, actually. My wife uses this my Zoom for other purposes.
Your nom de Zoom.
Yes, I'm on Zoom. Just to say that I'm very heavily involved with Bungle Nursery, which probably a lot of people would know about. Just to say that this has been an absolutely brilliant talk tonight on seed banks in particular, which I've been very strong about with this nursery over the last 5 years. Just to say for the group who's listening tonight, the nursery is actually involved with another 4 nurseries in the eastern part of Melbourne, Indigenous plant nurseries called Synerg, which we're now looking at basically separating seeds or just diversifying the populations as best we can. What we're finding is that species diversification, if we're collecting in very specific areas, is actually dying off now. So what we're now doing is to actually collect seeds from a much broader range to try and get that diversification back into the system again.
Yeah.
And it's all a question of collaboration. With respect to the seed bank side, fortunately, we've managed through council to actually get an extension of our operations at Bungle. And one of the key things I'm looking at there is to create a seed bank as such, which can actually, look after, the diversification process. The other thing I'm looking at very closely is what we have to do is look at areas further north of us, insofar as those species that will probably be better equipped to survive in a climate which is drying out to the south.
Good point. Very good point.
So it's all that sort of stuff that we're looking at. As far as I'm concerned, with this nursery, is we're not looking at the now. We're looking at what is probably going to be taking place in southern Australia over the next 20 years.
Very good.
But
Thank you for
what's
that.
been talked about tonight was fantastic.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Okay. Bonnie Gilman, do you have your hand up too there, I see?
Yes. We'll just go screen. Kathy, thanks for the enlightenment and thanks for the passion. Some of it was hard to hear. We sit and do our stuff, and some of us aren't actually doing stuff like you are. So thanks for your efforts and thanks for your ongoing energies. Kathy, so I just had a look up. Annabelle Cleland is your Nationals MP for Euroa. What do they say about your seed not being taken up for use by government and non-government planters or people using seed?
Look, we've been to our state government representative Annabelle. She's raised it in Parliament. We've been to Helen Haynes. She's raised it in Parliament. we're really not we're just not getting any traction. We've been to all of our DECA people as well. They're all fully aware of it. We just don't seem to get any traction at all. I'm just not sure if that's, state government are palming it off on federal government are palming it off on state government, but we've known about this seed shortage for a long time. Paul Gibson-Roy did a report, I can't actually think when it was now, maybe 2016. Greening Australia have done one more recently. There's been reports since about early 2000s that we're heading into a seed shortage. It's been on the table for more than 20 years, and yet it just seems to be falling on deaf ears all the time with no traction at all.
But yeah, I look forward to Grassy Plains Network thinking about this with you, Kathy, because it's a strange one.
It is, and it is
Thanks,
something that
Adrian.
we are trying to focus on with thanks to people like John Dill Pratt and so on, who are leading the charge in this area, along with yourself, of course, Kath. But it's we trying to formulate the correct policy and get all the right people in the right room seems to be an extremely difficult thing to do. You mentioned at one point, Kath, that there's you're also focusing on getting diversity back into grasslands, and that's a completely different set of techniques and so on. Can you just very quickly elaborate on what you meant by that?
Yeah, well, we've been trying a whole range of different techniques. We've tried scalping. So I mentioned Paul Gibson-Roy, and John has been part of that process as well, has been Cath Horsfell. So that's been really successful, brilliantly successful. So we've got about 2.1 hectares of the arb that we've scalped. But we're also really conscious that it's not something that we can do at scale. And that's really what we want to work on. So we've worked a lot with our traditional owners and working at doing cool burning at the arb, really working at, can we burn at different times of the year for weed control? Can we build enough weed control into sites that we can then start oversowing and really starting to advantage more of the natives? Bronte Haynes, who's our grassland restoration officer at the arb, is doing great work with that. So we still use chemical, but we're really trying to drive down that chemical use, and we're using a lot more burning, whether it just be with a match or also with a gas blower. And that's working really well. Like, we're seeing wonderful success with our grassland, perhaps not the diversity yet that we're also seeing in our scalps, but it's getting there. And we've also used a little technique. It's a we initially used an old Furphy spike roller, which was a cracker that we borrowed from a chap locally in Euroa, to create little divots in the ground. Well, that worked such a treat, actually, with just being able to drop seed into them, that we bought an aerovator, which is essentially, it's a more modern version of doing the same thing. And so we'll nip around the place and create these little divots that are pretty much mimicking like a digging marsupial, we hope, and then dropping the seed in, and that's been really successful. So we're now looking at, well, where can we go and do more of this work? So we've got a lovely partnership rolling with the zoo, Melbourne Zoo. We've got a project with the Keys matchstick grasshopper, and that, I think, will enable us to actually, using this little grasshopper as one of our ambassador species, we'll be able to actually go out and do more work in different areas to actually be doing grassland restoration. But we won't be targeting the crap areas. We'll be targeting the good areas that already have native grasses that we can work at burning and reseeding, and working alongside of our TOs to do that. So we'll be working at supporting either Tamarong or Yorta Yorta, depending on the country we're working on. So that's been really successful too. And nicely, when we are sowing our scalp, we're using about 2 to 4 grams per square metre, which equates to about 20 to 40 kilos of seed per hectare. This is working at more like 4 kilos, 6 kilos a hectare. It's a vast reduction in how much seed, because we can place it really carefully.
Well, that's so important, as you've highlighted. Okay,
Yeah.
what a encouraging story. Other people, questions, please put your hands up. It's probably in this, says me, John Del Pratt.
John Del Pratt. Hello, the grandfather
Do
of
unmute
grassland.
yourself and speak.
Hey, Kath, that was terrific.
Hello.
Thank you. Fantastic.
You won't be happy me calling you the grandfather of grasslands, I know, but you are.
Great grandfather is what I'm accepting these days. So, you know, go with it. That's all right.
Marvellous.
Yeah, great
Congratulations.
grandfather. Yeah, that'll do. Hey, yeah, lovely information. Thank you. And it's great to hear that divot work, because we still, as you know, David's machine that sowed your areas uses that same aerated technique, and that was for the scalping, and we're yet to fully test that on existing swards. So we're pleased that someone else is picking up that particular load. Thank you. Hey, you started off by saying you're not really the Euroa Arboretum. Just to give you an extra problem, have you ever thought of a name change, and would that communicate better with the community if you took that step, or is it just too big a stride?
John, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because look, that was debated when I first started 15 years ago. That name was debated even then. I think there's some talk that, well, we've been Euroa Arboretum for so long and people know us as Euroa Arboretum. Should we change it? But we really are working at this point at doing a whole lot more work that's not that Euroa Arboretum centric, and it is really spreading out more across our catchment. And we're really happy to do that. So it's a time, actually, if we did raise it again with the committee, it's probably right to actually change our name. And the amount of work that we do with Mob, I'd really love to have an Indigenous name, actually, that they would select for the place. So who knows? But it's it's been battered backwards and forwards forever.
And just to get back to the topic, the firework that Bronte's doing, is that helping with native recovery, weed control, which is sort of the emphasis there? Are you getting better weed control with the burning process, or
extraordinary? So much better, John. I don't know. I don't know how we would do it if we were just using chemical.
Yeah,
or
well, you can't,
chemical and whippersnipping. I honestly don't know how we would do it. And I think the difference that we're really seeing is that we're shifting nitrogen in the soil. And I've had some soil scientists say the same thing, that, you know, when we've got our new veld grass that's growing up, or we've got a great green sward of sweet vernal grass, if we can burn it when it's already above ground, we're literally taking that very nitrogen-rich grass, we're taking that nitrogen out of the system and we're shifting it. And that's been enormous for shifting the site. It's dramatic. But it's not the first burn. And sometimes it's not even the second burn, but it's the third and the fourth burn that we're actually really seeing that shift. So it's that persistence and constantly working at that site and really starting to see things change. And sometimes we won't get it right. There'll be sometimes that will burn in autumn and you think, oh, bugger, now we've opened up this whole grassland for sweet vernal to germinate in midwinter. But as I say to the mob when we're working together, I say, bugger, we got it wrong. Great burn, but we got it wrong. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because in another 18 months, it's back again and we're able to do it again and we'll get it right the next time. And in actual fact, as Bronte's showing me as well, is it's not uncommon that what looks like was a problem, actually over a period of time, over 18 months, actually it might have just settled down and it might have just opened it enough in summer that we're actually getting a different native species coming up. In one spot, we've had quite a great Eragrostis growth instead. So that's really shifted it from being much more Ritodisperma, the wallaby grass dominated winter form, and we've got this summer form kicking in, which is then starting to take over that weed issue. So it's been really significant, that burning work. Yeah.
Thanks, Kath. That's terrific. Thank you.
Just but in once to say
There
that
she is.
to provide an example, there's a patch of Aracida that we burnt 2 years ago, and we thought that when we burnt it at the wrong time of the year. And we did have a sweet vernal come back in Vulpia the first year, and we thought it was an issue. And then the second season, so 2 years on, it's basically 100% native. So it just goes to show like the length of time that you need to observe a patch.
Do you suspect you're just exhausting a seed bank there, or do you not have can't you attribute yet what's actually happening?
I don't know what's happening yet. You'll have to come up.
Oh,
And John, I honestly don't know. This whole thing, you know, sometimes about exhausting a seed bank, it takes 8 years of weeding or something to reduce a seed bank. I think that's a load of crap. I really do. Like, I think consistently that's not necessarily what we're saying, and it's taking such a long time if that's the only way that we're dealing with things to exhaust a seed bank. So, you know, there was a talk that if you broke a cycle of sweet vernal for 1 year, that would be enough. Well, it's not. It's just not. You know, there's enough seed in that seed bank, so we need to change the growing circumstances around that plant, rather than thinking we're going to keep driving down the seed bank. We need to do that too, but I think that the circumstances need to change to some extent.
beautiful. Thanks, folks. Hello, Bronte.
Julie Thompson, you have your hand up and you're on mute. You're on mute though.
Thank you. I'm now on unmute. Thanks for that. Great ideas, Cathy. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm a volunteer seed collector. And my questions surround how do you train people and how many years does it take to train them? Do you start on certain species and then just build up their knowledge? Or do you look at the qualities? What type of people do you look for? What type of qualities do these people have? Do they come to you? Do they naturally gravitate to you? Or do you have to reach out and find them?
Oh, good questions, Julie. They tend to come. They do tend to come. And I'm amazed, you know, you just saw Bronte. She's the most wonderful bright spark at the Arboretum. But I tell you, she's not on her own. We've got a number of bright sparks at the Arboretum. She's a standout, but you know, there are some great young people that are coming to us that I'm just amazed at, that they're prepared to deal with our crappy work situation and our crappy pay, but they still keep coming. Bronte's come to us with already good plant ID skills. We've got quite a few that already have good plant ID skills, and that's a huge plus. That's a huge plus if you've already got those skills.
Yep.
And then it is a matter of training. And I think we're probably looking at a minimum of about 5 years to really build that skill base. And I still don't think that's enough if we're looking at big diversity across our catchment. I think it's okay to actually build that skill base for a smaller area. So perhaps having zones that we might all work to. And I think that's actually probably the better way to go if we're going to still stick to that wild collection. But as you know, seed collectors are sort of nuts. I don't know if you are, but all of us are. And, you know, we're really still mad about going out, you know, in stinking hot degrees and, you know, snaky areas. We're still out collecting because we just love it. You just can't stop yourself going out and putting your pockets full of seed.
Yeah, it is exciting, and we do temper our enthusiasm with coffee and cake.
Marvelous, sensible.
But I think my knowledge was zip when I started. So I joined an elderly lady, Noel Gross. She's 91 now, and I've been collecting with her for 15 years. And I think I'm on P plates.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's sad, isn't it? Yep. And look, I started as a very little girl. John Del Pratt, who was just in before, was a co-worker with my dad. You know, from the youngest age, we were always out picking seed. Dad always had his pockets full of seed. Mum was always going crook at him for having seed in the wash because he'd forget to empty his pocket at
Oh.
the end of the seed. So, you know, that's the thing. It gets in your blood a bit, and you can't.
Yeah, it does.
You
It
can't not
does.
do it. So
Well-
you know the seed pickers out there when they can't stop themselves, and you think, right, here's one. This is worth training. They've got that itch in their blood. They're not gonna stop picking. It's not just a 9 to 5. It's something that they love.
Itching
Yeah,
their
I know.
socks too, I expect. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps
Thanks
we've
for
got
that,
time.
Kathy.
Yeah. Perhaps
Keep
we've
up the
got
good
time
work,
for
Julie.
one last question. We're getting close to 8 p.m, so we're going well over time, as we always do, and which we enjoy doing. Vicky Leris, you have your hand up. Vicky, you're on mute if you're.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Beautiful. Sorry. Hi, Kathy. I'm setting up a bit of a community seed bank with collectors out in East Gippsland for the East Gippsland Land Care Network. They did find funding to run a little bit. We're now talking about extending that into an orchard. I'm interested with the 30 odd, mostly used species. Is that what you suggest we start with? Like planting 30, because they tend to be Myrtaceae and the things that there's most of in the bush. So my leaning would be to go towards setting up the rarer species in a seed bank, simply because after a fire there's nothing where I knew them to be for 20 years. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a question, isn't it? Look, we went into a lot of debate about which would be on our list.
Yeah.
And I suspect that's probably what you're going to have to do, really debate which is on your list, which are the ones that you've got good, stable populations of that you can harvest in the wild that maybe don't make it to that orchard yet. But I wouldn't necessarily go to the rarest end of the spectrum either, because you really need to think about where are they going? Where is that seed going? Is it going into nurseries? Is it going into direct seeding?
The farmers are screaming for direct seeding. We've got the shortage out here with no seed bank as well.
Yep.
But there's also a lot of like rainforest pockets that need, well, all of warm temperate rainforest is a protected EVC. So even though the individual plants are rare, the plants are, and some of them don't even store, which is a different story. They can only be sown fresh. But those other things to support, say the fire resistant or the suppressant or the less flammable species that take a longer time to germinate would be the way to go.
Yeah, and look, when we were thinking about it too, we didn't think that we just needed one orchard. We actually think what we probably need is an orchard in the north. So
Yeah.
probably something more like 10 hectares in the north. We really want to have an orchard near us that's easy to check, that we don't have to faff about driving, that we can put the bulk of our chunky species in.
Yeah.
So that's sort of our big guns. And then we're really keen, if we ever find a site, we're keen for about 100 acres up in the Strathbogies. So we can really target those species that we're dropping out, those ARC species. But we 100% know those ARC species aren't going to pay for themselves.
No.
We're not going to actually make the money in sales from those ARC species. We just need to protect them. So it's all about, are you working on conservation? Are you working on sales? And I would just suggest that you work on your sales. For starters, you need to still be able to make sure that you're in existence.
Yeah.
And you can see from all that oscillating, prices and amounts that are coming in, it's not easy to make a seed bank pay for itself. And that's why so many of our seed banks have dropped out of the system.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I'm a TAFE teacher. I didn't just run it off, make it up. I ran seed collection training for 10 fire impacted communities and had 10 to 15 people at each. We did it over a series of weekends, and a lot of the people here are on big rural properties. They're collecting from their own place, and we've planted rare things in the understory under their windbreak shelter belt wildlife corridors from which to collect in future. But I am now hassling people to give us a site that I thought 50 acres, but you reckon 100.
No,
which is-
look, 50 acres is good. 50 acres is great. That's a great start. But just really make sure that your spacing's right for your species, that you think about how you're going to harvest. You know, we're really conscious that we can get a vehicle up the middle of our rows so that we, you know, it's easier for harvest. And at some point, I'll be really looking forward to actually looking at the orchard industry and how they harvest en masse. You know, I'm quite keen on getting machinery in to do it for us instead of all doing it by hand. So, you know, it's that sort of scaling up that I think is really going to be worthwhile. That's going to be where it makes a difference.
Fabulous. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think what this conversation and all the questions in the chat that I have not got to highlight is that we really need a forum, a second forum, or an ongoing means of being able to discuss these, get together and discuss these in more detail and so on. It's not the extensive knowledge that has to be transferred isn't going to happen. Unfortunately, in the 90 minutes of a Zoom call, but let's
scratch the surface, though, Adrian.
Yes, I think Cath has planted the seed, and we will continue to harvest the seed bank of her knowledge, and we'll see where we go from here. But I think we're going to wind up.
I can see in your participant list that you've got more than just me in the room as well. So you've already got quite an audience there that's got some decent knowledge there as well.
Indeed, absolutely. So we better wind up. It is past 8 o'clock. Thank you very much, Cath, for the yes, a wonderful presentation and a great transfer of knowledge. And we will perhaps take a break now just for 8 minutes to 10 past 8, when you can all, please, if you like, join us for the Grassy Plains Network meeting. Otherwise, I'll see you at the next talk as it goes. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks, Kathy. It was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Pleasure, pleasure.